I'm sure most Americans saw President Biden go on television last week and state that the bill will not add $1 single to the federal deficit. Many of the leaders of the House of Representatives have been on television this week making that same claim. Our response to the President and to the leadership of the House is, if that is the case, Mr. President, prove it. Madam Speaker, prove it. And the way that you prove it is to allow the Congressional Budget Office to do its job and to issue a fiscal score on the bill before the bill is brought up for a vote. Only then will we know what the true cost of this bill will be. That is why today we are sending a letter to Speaker Pelosi, signed by nearly half of the members of the House of Representatives, urging her to wait to vote on the budget reconciliation bill until the Congressional Budget Office has issued a score on that bill. And here is why that is so important. Nearly any economist will tell you that deficit spending is dangerously inflationary. And unfortunately, Americans are already feeling the effects of inflation today. In fact, inflation is running at an annual rate currently at over 7%. That's the highest rate in over 40 years. And the people that we represent are feeling the effects of that inflation. The price of basic commodities like beef and milk and coffee is up substantially over 1 year ago. Every American family is going to be paying more for their Thanksgiving dinner now than they were a year ago. Constituents in my district are spending today over $20 more to fill their gas tanks just to go to work than they were a year ago. So the decisions that are made in this building have very real consequences for the people that we represent. That is why we think it is so important to make sure that we know what this bill will cost before we vote on the bill. And in fact, our rules require that. The Budget Control Act of 1974 requires that the Congressional Budget Office issue a score on budget reconciliation bills. And House Rule 13, our own rule, requires us to have that score before voting on a bill. Imagine the ridiculousness of us telling the American people that they ought to follow the rules, but at the same time telling them that although we have rules and we believe in the rules, we follow the rules only until we decide to waive the rules, in which case there are no rules. That would be not only irresponsible, it would be reckless, given the fiscal price tag on this bill. So with me today, I have many of my colleagues that will give you their thoughts on this issue, and I'm looking forward to listening to what they have to say. First up is my friend from Florida, Byron Donalds, a man whose heroic efforts on our congressional football team last night were much appreciated.
I want to thank my good colleague from California, Jay Obernolte, for putting this press conference together. He's exactly right. It is time for Nancy Pelosi and House Democrats to actually prove it. What they need to actually tell the American people is that what this bill does is it creates more tax breaks for the very wealthy in blue states. They are creating a $23,000 tax break for every millionaire in blue states across America. That's simply outrageous. Now, I know you guys remember when we passed the Tax Cut and Jobs Act a few years ago, and the talking points from the Democrats then, and even still today, that they were tax cuts for the rich. Well, who's doing the tax cuts for the rich now? The tax cuts that they are doing are for the wealthy in blue states. Meanwhile, working class Americans, they'll probably see a tax break of about, I don't know, $15. That is sick. It's insane. But that's what's happening in the nation's capital today. A few days ago, we saw in Virginia, we saw in New Jersey, we saw in Minneapolis, we saw in school boards all across America, the American people have rejected the liberal policies of Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, and Nancy Pelosi, and they've also rejected those same ideas in local governments and state governments in blue states. But Nancy Pelosi doesn't care. She's going to try to ram through her agenda no matter what. So right now, they're in the process of actually putting in the worst elements of budget reconciliation back in this bill. They dropped a 500-page amendment to the bill yesterday. They that members of Congress are still trying to sift through and figure out exactly what is happening. So we need a score. We need to follow the rules. It is time that Washington is responsible with the people's money. So to the Speaker of the House, we simply tell you to prove it, get a score, and make sure for once you don't give tax breaks for the wealthy in blue states because they don't need that money. And secondarily, we don't need to be spending our country into oblivion. We need to be unleashing our economy so all of America's people can thrive and prosper. Thank you so much, Jay, for putting this together.
Thank you, Byron. Next up, we have Congressman Laddermore.
Thanks, Jay. Thank you for all being here today. Look, I'm inundated, as all of these people up here are, all of my colleagues are, from folks back home, trying to figure out what's going on in Washington, D.C. I mean, just think back over the past few weeks. We have not had a vote on the budget. Nancy Pelosi went to rules, had provision put in a procedural vote that deemed the budget to have passed. Then we saw the same thing happen with the extending the debt ceiling with our government, is we just deemed it to have passed. Why? We don't want to have floor debates because what is actually in those bills and the impact it would have on America may be known by the American people. Desperate people do desperate things. But I'm not so sure that Nancy is desperate right now, because if you think of anything in the past, remember this phrase: we need to pass it to figure out what's in it. We saw this transpire on Obamacare that passed in the middle of the night, I believe on Christmas Eve. Why? Because they knew if the American people knew what was in this legislation, they would be totally opposed to it, as they were Obamacare. This is why they're playing these procedural games. This is why they'll drop last week a 2,000-page bill and then threatening to vote on that bill within an hour or two. This is the type of game they're playing. The only reason that they gave language to the bill is because I actually found something I agree with the progressives on. We really need to know what's in the bill before we vote on it. So they drop language. No one has enough time to digest not only what is in the bill, but what impact it will have on Americans. It's time that we stand up and enforce the rules of the House and enforce the rules of law and say, look, if you're going to move forward with this type of disastrous legislation, you ought to at least let the American people know the truth of what impact it's going to have on their lives. We're going to stand united. We're going to keep fighting. And who knows? We may be voting this week. We may be voting next week, or she just may at some point deem reconciliation to have passed. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Next up, my friend from California, Congressman Mike Garcia.
Well, thank you, Jay. I want to thank Jay for putting this together. My colleague from California knows what happens when you don't pay attention to the fundamentals of the economy and our financial systems. Look, what we're asking for here, guys, is not unreasonable. As an appropriator, I don't think that what we're asking for is unreasonable. As a small business owner, and as an executive at a large company in a prior life, I don't believe what we're asking for is unreasonable. We need to know what we're spending. We need to know where the money is going. We need to know the implications of this on our economy, how it affects our taxes, how it affects our debt. We know none of those things right now without
people. Why would we ever vote on a 1,600-page bill that no one has been able to read so far? 500 pages just added to it last night, what we just heard. It makes 0 sense, yet that's exactly what the tone-deaf left is pushing us to do. Let me be very clear. Every citizen deserves to know the true cost of this monstrosity of a bill. Unfortunately, the Democrats don't want you to know. They know that Biden's 0 line is a total lie. They know that in truth, this sham of a bill will add trillions more to our already $30 trillion national debt. They know that it will kill thousands more jobs, worsen skyrocketing inflation, which we've already heard is sitting at a 30-year high, and destroy any hope of ever securing our southern border. Being from Texas, I'm telling you, that is very serious for the entire country. Americans are being hurt in every way by Democrat policies, while Pelosi and her liberal cronies continue to work through their radical agenda with no concern at all about the damage that they're doing. Here's the bottom line. Voting on a bill that will forever change America without a CBO price tag showing its real consequences is a complete dereliction of their duty. Speaker Pelosi, do the right thing, because the American people deserve better than what they've been getting from you and your party so far. With that, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Brian. Next we'll hear from a woman who may be small in stature but is mighty in spirit, Congresswoman Marinette Miller-Meeks.
Thank you very much. You know, I'm going to be brief. The average ordinary person brings in a certain amount of money and they spend what they have. And when they don't, they rack up their credit card debt. So why is Speaker Pelosi racking up the credit card debt? Not on me. She's racking up the credit card debt on all of you and your children and your grandchildren. And this is years to come. Meanwhile, she's telling us we're going to really like it if we just pass it. We don't know what's in it. We don't know how much it costs. We demand that we get a CBO score for this, and we're going to honor our representation of the American people by knowing what we vote for, how much it costs, and how much zero really means, which we know that means you're going to pay for the average, ordinary American trying to raise a family, work and live in the United States, and have the opportunities they so wish to deserve. Thank you, Jay. Thank you to my colleagues for doing this. I appreciate it. And hopefully to see some action on it.
Thank you, Marinette. Next we'll hear from Congresswoman Nancy Mace.
Thank you, Jay. And Dr. Miller-Meeks, when my kids come home and say, hey, they overspent their allowance, I don't give them a flashing credit card and say you can spend whatever you want for the rest of your life, right? And real American people have consequences. And Nancy Pelosi is trying to steal the American people by not showing them what is actually in this bill before we vote on it, not giving it a CBO score. And we're in a time and a place in this country where inflation is at record highs, between 5.5% and 6% this year, the same marker as it was in 2008 during the Great Recession. Wages have only gone up 3%. Everything costs more. I still drive a 2011 Chevy because I'm not going to go out and spend the kind of money it costs today to go buy a car. If I went to go fill up my truck on Sunday, it cost me $50. A year ago, it was half that. Every hardworking family is going through all of these tough times right now. The cost of goods, the grocery store, gas, everything is going up, and wages cannot keep up with inflation. And here we have this bill, this legislation that she wants to ram through. Everything we've been told this year by Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and even President Joe Biden, to my dismay, has been wrong or a flat-out lie. We were told that when Biden got elected, he would work to unite this country, he would work with Republicans and Democrats together to bring all this division and bring us and unite us together. But when we did the COVID relief package, the $1.9 trillion, Republicans were shut out. When we did infrastructure, Republicans in the House were shut out. You know, he's done more damage in the first 6 months of this year than I thought possible in 4, and that is before the crisis in Afghanistan, where we left hundreds of American citizens behind. We left P1, P2, and SIP visa holders behind. We left people behind, Afghan nationals who were willing to take a bullet for our country. We left them behind in the hands of the Taliban. Not to mention the border crisis that the Democrats will not bring up. I had a hearing and oversight a couple weeks ago about the northern border, where there are less than 10,000 apprehensions at the northern border. But in October alone, they were talking about 300,000 to 400,000 apprehensions alone down there. And now we're talking about a spending bill that the President and Nancy Pelosi have told us is going to cost the American people nothing, which is complete and total bullshit. It is all a lie. Money does not grow on trees, okay? And this is going to be one of the highest tax hikes in American history on working people. And when they talk about taxing the rich, when they talk about making corporations pay their fair share, when you actually read the details of this bill, what you learn, it is even worse than that. If they were truly concerned about having the rich pay their fair share, they would close all these loopholes, particularly for the wealthy. In fact, one of the provisions they talked about in the reconciliation bill is that if you're buying a $500,000 house, you're getting $86,000 subsidies. Like, this is for rich people, not for hardworking American families. So I am deeply disappointed. All of us demand that Nancy Pelosi do the right thing, wait to have a vote on this until there's a CBO score, so the American people know exactly what's going to be spent and what the long-term consequences consequences will be on them, their businesses, their families, and their kids and their future. Thank you, Jay.
Thank you very much, Nancy. Next, we'll hear from Congressman Jim Burchett.
Notice he didn't say anything about my football skills last night. I guess, you know, being the MVP, I guess it just kind of goes without saying. Folks, this bill is illegal, immoral, shady as hell. It's expensive. It fundamentally alters social programs and tax structure. It's irresponsible for us not knowing what's in it to vote on it. You know, in Tennessee, everybody knocks Tennessee. Do you know how much debt we have in Tennessee, the state of Tennessee? Zero, because everything comes from the fiscal note. If it has $1 on it, it goes to the finance committee, and they dissect it. Every line, every comma, every verse. The Democrats are afraid of us finding out what's in it, and when I say us, the American people. They know that it's full of garbage and pet projects, special little parks, little spending, hidden in little cubby holes. They don't want us to find. How the heck are families earning less than $400,000 a year supposed to know that their taxes will increase if we don't have a CBO score? I say no CBO score, no dadgum vote. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we'll hear from Congressman Brian Stile.
Thanks for having us here, Jay. The American people deserve to know the price tag of the bill that they're being asked to pay for. Nancy Pelosi told us the price tag was $0. Why does Nancy Pelosi not want the American people to know what the price tag of this bill is? Because it's not $0. The American people deserve to know the cost of this bill because they're ultimately going to be forced to pay for it if it passes. When people head home for Thanksgiving, when you buy a gallon of gas and fill up your car, if you didn't know the price of the gasoline, you wouldn't. When you stay at a hotel, when you go visit your relatives as you go home for Thanksgiving, if you didn't know the cost of the hotel, no, you wouldn't. When you buy a ticket to fly home to see your family at Thanksgiving, if you didn't know the cost of the ticket, no, you wouldn't. Why? Because you know it doesn't cost $0. The American people know that the bill that's coming before the House does not cost $0, and Nancy Pelosi is refusing to show and tell the American people the cost of this bill. What we're doing here today is asking Nancy Pelosi to show us the price tag of this bill, because ultimately the American people are going to be left footing her bill. Thanks for having us here, Jay.
Thanks, Brian. Next, we'll hear from my friend from California, Congressman Laddermore.
It's just common sense to want to know the price of something. If I need a roof for my house, I'm going to want to find out what the bid is for the roof. If I'm going to buy a tractor for my farm, well, the first thing to ask is how much is that new tractor? So when you're getting a bid on a new construction project, we do the bidding for the American people. All right? So how come we can't know the price of something, especially when you're talking trillions ahead of time? So we need to take the time out and at least let the Congressional Budget Office do its job and run the numbers for us so we can do it in front of everybody. Now, just last night, unanimously, a resolution was passed, H.Con. 44, which would be the fiscal state of the nation resolution. Something we shall take the first day we walk in as a new member of Congress. Have a snapshot. What is the fiscal state of the nation? So we had unanimous bipartisan consent last night to pass the Fiscal State of the Nation Act so we can take snapshots. Yet we're forcing through, or Pelosi is forcing through, something that's going to cost trillions, and we don't even know the price because we're in such a hurry to do it because we want to pull the wool over the eyes of the American people. Instead, we see the prices of everything going up. Think, thousands of containers sitting outside of our ports, especially in California and the West Coast, driving the cost of everything up. The spending here, inflation driving the cost of everything. I guess they're still reflecting in the afterglow of the 16 cents we saved on the 4th of July picnic. Now we're going to see our Thanksgiving costs go up 30, 40, 50%. So we have to use a little more common sense around here and be a heck of a lot more transparent and let the CBO do their job. The instead of trying to force something through before Mrs. Pelosi goes off to retirement. So let's hang tight together and demand that of this Congress.
Thank you, Doug. Next we'll hear from the leader of the Western Congress, my friend, Congressman Dan.
Well, first I want to thank Congressman for having us together here to draw attention to something that's really a terrible thing that's happening here in Washington, D.C. Just take a second and look around our country. We know we're in a state of crisis. And the reason for that is largely because of the policies of this administration and what this Congress is trying to do, the Democrats. Now, the Biden administration is doubling down on those policies with this largest social spending bill in the history of our country. This legislation is going to be devastating for the people I represent, people that produce much of the food and fiber in this country. The worst part about it, we've heard it already, we don't even know what it's going to cost us in the long run. That right there is a definition of price tag. So today I am proud to stand with members of my Congress and join several members of the Democratic Congress calling for the same thing, asking the Speaker to require the Congressional Budget Office to be able to weigh in to let us know what this piece of legislation is going to cost our country, our taxpayers. You know, our national debt has already gone over $20 trillion. Let me put that in some perspective. That's over $230,000 for every taxpayer in this country. Imagine that. I know my constituents don't have that kind of money. Maybe yours do. We owe it to our children. We owe it to future generations to return to fiscal responsibility in this country. And that starts with legislating responsibly and thoughtfully, and not just being radicals. Thank you, Jay.
Thank you, Dan. Next we'll hear from the President of the Republican Christian Class, Congressman Stephanie.
Thank you so much, Jay, for organizing this morning's press conference. When the reconciliation bill was first put out, it was suggested it was $3.5 trillion. The price tag, after looking at it a little closer, went up to $4.3 trillion. Then Democrats began to say, wait, we can't spend that much, so let's lower it to, $1.75 trillion. The reality is, we don't know the cost. This Democrat leadership wants to pass a bill that we don't know what the actual fiscal ramifications will be. So today, this conference stands before you and asks you to prove it. Democrats across this country need to be able to go back to their districts and explain why they're putting this tax and burden on the backs of hardworking Americans. Without knowing those numbers, they're passing something that we just don't know what's in it. As Nancy Pelosi said in 2010 during the Obamacare debate, it is time that we demand accountability from the Democrats, and it starts here today. We ask you to make sure that this has a CBO score so we know what the American people should know, and that's what's in this bill. Thank you, Jay, for putting this together today.
Thank you, Stephanie. Next we'll hear from my friend, Congressman Kelly Armstrong.
I've heard a lot of people talk today about policies and how terrible they are for the American people, but we can talk about the politics. The only reason this vote is moving forward today before there's a CBO score is because they're trying to change a bad news cycle. Because I don't think Tuesday night was great for Democrats. It wasn't great for Virginia. It wasn't great for New Jersey. And the other answer to this is they're pushing this forward because they know if they wait long enough, that records will lose. They've ran through two artificial deadlines because they didn't have the votes for this. Every single Democrat who votes for this should be held accountable for this because the only reason they're pushing it forward right now is they need to change the news cycle, and they know the longer this sits out there. Listen, they don't have the votes on the Republican side. We haven't been part of this the entire time. But the American people deserve to know the reason we are voting for a bill that we don't know what it costs, we don't know what's in it, is simply so they can change it forward, so they can get a short-term political win. The cost is coming out. They have to have a CBO score before most of the reconciliation process in the Senate. So it's one thing to ask us why we're doing what we're doing here. We should ask every Democrat why they're voting for us, why they're doing it. They're doing it so they can give a lame duck speaker a short-term win. That's not fair to them, and it sure as hell not fair to the Americans.
Thank you, Kelly. Next we'll hear from Congressman Fred Kelly.
Thank you, Jay. I thank my colleague from California and all my colleagues for joining me this morning. We've heard many reasons of what's wrong with this process and what's happening. But I'm going to speak to you as a kid that grew up in America poor, somebody that made ends meet working at a factory, somebody that ran a small business, and somebody that had to meet a budget. None of those things, Speaker Pelosi, Leader Schumer, President Biden, didn't run a business. They didn't have to be concerned about the livelihoods of the people they worked with every day. Well, you know what? I'm standing here as an American saying and demanding that Speaker Pelosi do her job. And that job is to make sure that we know the score of this bill before it's voted on. It's not zero. The only person that's costing zero to is Speaker Pelosi, Joe Biden, and Chuck Schumer, because they're not going to have to pay for this. The American people are going to pay for this. So I'm demanding that they do their job. We can't pass something to find out what's in it. And that's how she's running things right now. And that is unacceptable for me and my colleagues that are here saying this is the wrong thing to do. So Speaker Pelosi, do your job, wait for a score, and make sure, have the confidence in the American people like I do, that they know what's best for them, not you. We cannot do this. I know people are thoughtful. I know they understand things. And they understand that this is not a good deal. They're going to have to pay for it. So I thank my colleagues. I thank Jay for having this press conference. And I look forward to forcing Speaker Pelosi to work for the school testimony.
Thank you, Fred. Next we'll hear from Congressman Van Taylor.
Thank you, Jay. Appreciate everybody being here. This is really important. Economics 101. We've got inflation. Prices are going up. By all means, we have the worst inflation we've had in 30 years. It's gone up every single month under President Biden's presidency. Economics 101. Stop the spending. Stop the spending. Instead, the Democrats are going the wrong direction economically for the future of this country, for every single American who's wondering, how am I going to pay for that next tank of gas? How am I going to buy that side of bacon? How am I going to... 19%. How am I going to pay for the things that are affecting my family every single day? Pelosi's doing the wrong thing here. She's claiming, ludicrously, that this costs nothing. We'll prove it. Prove it right here and now. Get a CBO score, because this bill, this reconciliation, this is not a run-of-the-mill reconciliation. This bill is designed to transform America. We're here to defend America. We think America's the greatest nation on earth. We're going to fight for it to the end.
Next we'll hear from Congressman Clay Higgins.
Ladies and gentlemen, Madam Speaker Pelosi, President Biden, stealing your country. We face a $30 trillion debt. May help us get our head wrapped around that. If this body, the House of Representatives, will balance the budget, which it will not until conservatives and fiscally responsible representatives take control. If we were to balance the budget and run a $1 billion surplus, it would require 30,000 years of a $1 billion surplus to address a $30 trillion debt. Go ahead, Google it, all right? What they're attempting to do, passing this reconciliation bill with no CBO score, that's not new. This is the way that the Democrats are running things. There's no more regular order. There's no debate. There's no Republican amendments accepted to bills. There's no hearings. They're radically changing your tax code with no debate and no hearings. America, listen, we're trying to address this thing legally and peacefully within the parameters Patriots are not going to stand by and allow America to be dissolved under our feet. Some of us are going to stand and fight. We're going to use diplomacy. We're going to be kind. We're going to be gentlemanly. We're going to work with our colleagues across the aisle. But ultimately, we the people win. The men and women standing with me here today get it. We have to straighten this thing out, not for us, but for the generations yet unborn that we serve, that we will not turn our backs on. Madam Speaker Pelosi, you want to know what this bill will cost you? It will cost you your majority. It will cost you your seat. We don't need the CBO to tell us that. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here today. I very much thank my colleagues for organizing this press conference.
Thank you, Greg. Next we'll hear from Congressman Chris Jacobs.
Thank you very much, Jay. Thank you, everybody, for being here. This is incredibly important. I think we're trying to do here. It is really amazing when you think about it that we have to be here, though, that the largest piece of legislation ever passed in this nation, and leadership is not going to ask for more demand what it's going to cost us. That is where we are. I don't think any of us would pay for any good service and decide about a paycheck and go to the person and say, oh, just fill it out. You know what it is. None of us would do that personally, and none of us here want to do that as an obligation we have to protect this nation. This, again, is the largest piece of legislation expenditure. Likely, we do not know the amount it is. I personally believe every piece of legislation that we pass here, we should score, but at a minimum, we should score, and demands score for the largest piece of legislation. We have an inflationary crisis right now that is causing policies and the rampant expenditure that we see. To think that spending more to help the situation is insanity, but at a minimum, you can be for or against the policies here, against socialism and slander, but at a minimum, I believe every Democrat should be supportive of the CBO's legislation. And again, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And finally, we'll hear from my friend Congressman Don Baker.
Thank you. Well, I agree with all the things you said today, so I'm going to bring up a couple of things that have not been said. I totally support the comments made. No, a year ago, the voters thought they elected Obama president. So that's the way he presented himself. And also in doing so, put 14 more Republicans in the House. We ended up with a 50-50 Senate. It was not a mandate for a Bernie Sanders welfare state, high-tax state. That was not the mandate. You have a 50-50 Senate, 5-seat majority in the House. Right now, 2 of the seats are empty or vacant. And a president who barely won, it's not a mandate. They're operating it as if it's a mandate to transform America. That's their words. And Americans are clear, they did not want that. They wanted someone to operate from the center. That's what they thought they got, and they did not get that. And they're not happy. This Tuesday, we saw the results. A 12-point swing in Virginia. A 16-point swing in New Jersey. So how do they interpret it? They think, well, they're not moving fast enough. Or they're tone deaf. They're not listening. What the voters are saying, they're pointed the wrong direction. And thankfully, some of our Democrats get that. There was a letter put out yesterday by 5 who said they will not vote for the bill unless they get a CBO score. We here stand in support of that. That's the right decision. There are other Democrats saying they won't vote for it unless they get the parliamentary rules that everything passes the word. That's a right decision. We should demand that as well. So the American voters are clear. This is not what they want. They don't want the country transformed into a state, high taxation. They want to preserve a centrist policy. And that's what I want to add to this conversation today. And I think I pray and hope that those Democrats who said they would not vote for the bill without a CBO score, without the parliamentary rules,
Congress should know exactly what this bill will cost before we vote on it. So, Mr. President, Madam Speaker, if you say this bill will not add a single dollar to the deficit, then prove it and allow the Congressional Budget Office to do its job and calculate the cost of the bill for it. And here is why that matters. Last year, we passed a very dubious milestone. For the first time since World War II, our national debt exceeded the size of our economy. And at the rate we're going, in just a few short years, it will more than double the size of our economy. It would be irresponsible and reckless to enact the largest spending bill in American history without knowing the impact that bill will have on our federal deficit and, by extension, on our national debt. We owe our public and we owe the American people and the people that we represent the courtesy of having that information before we make a vote. And as Congressman Bacon just pointed out, this is not a partisan issue. Everyone ought to agree that the deliberations and decisions made in that building should be fully informed and should benefit from all of the information that we have. So I want to thank you very much for being here for our press conference. That concludes our conference, and afterwards we'd be happy to take any questions that you might have. Thank you for being here.